From fairest creatures we desire increase. When 40 winters shall besiege thy brow, look in thy glass and tell the face thou viewest. The first 9 sonnets have an anonymous, vague narrator. In sonnet number 10, a first-person narrator makes an entrance. Is this a fictitious character, or is Will Shakespeare speaking? For sonnet number 10, at least, this is unlikely. It begins with, "For shame! Deny that thou bearest love to any who for thyself art so unprovident." This is the remonstrating tone of a concerned parent. It ends with, "Make thee another self, for love of me, that beauty still may live in thine and thee." Make thee another self. That is to say, hand down your beauty to posterity by begetting children. The phrase, "for love of me," is particularly telling. It's the favorite expression of a mother who attempts to partly coax and partly bully her offspring into doing something when her child is dragging his or her feet. I love the thought that Will Shakespeare puts himself into a mother's shoes. With sonnet number 18, as you already know, there is another, more personal change of tone. From then on, the I talks in a very intimate tone to one, or maybe several, thou. Scholars have dubbed this thou character the fair youth. Whether there is only one or multiple fair youths has been a point of contention amongst scholars ever since. I lean towards the latter, the multiple fair youths. Let us assume the Earl of Southampton to be the recipient of the first 20 or so sonnets. In sonnet 126, however, Will Shakespeare addresses the sonnet's subject as "my lovely boy." I don't think that Will Shakespeare would have dared to address the Earl of Southampton so, even if they were very close. Some social barriers are not to be breached. Sonnets are not strictly private. Even in their unpublished form, they change hands. Given their musical quality, they are perfect for reciting in an afternoon's or evening's entertainment. The expression sonnet derives from Old Provençal son, or song. And they must have elicited thrilled astonishment, those tender words Will uses. Thy sweet self, unthrifty loveliness, and shall I compare thee to a summer's day, are not directed towards a woman. They are directed towards a precocious young man. Not all the sonnets, of course. And here again, as with everything concerning Shakespeare's life, we can only speculate about which order the sonnets were written in, making it impossible to associate a sonnet with a particular person. In any case, Will certainly isn't shocked by homosexual love. Perhaps he isn't a stranger to it himself. Or perhaps he just wants to tickle his audience's imagination by resorting to homoerotic language. The first 9 sonnets do not talk of physical conquest and possession. On the contrary, they try to convince a young man to get married and beget children in order to pass down his extraordinary beauty.
Wenn 40 Winter deine Stirn umdrängen, der Schönheit Flur voll Furchen steht verheert und deiner Jugend Kleid dran so viel Augen hängen, ist Plunderkram und keinen Groschen wert. Ist Plunderkram und keinen Groschen wert. Plunderkram und keinen Groschen, Plunderkram und keinen Groschen, Plunderkram und keinen Groschen, Plunderkram, keinen Groschen.
When 40 winters shall besiege thy brow and dig deep trenches in thy beauteous field. Thy youth's proud livery, so gazed on now, will be a tattered weed of small worth held.
Wirst da sie dich nach ihr der Schönheit fragen, nach all der Tage und der Schätze Ort. Du dies beim eingesunkenen Auge sagen, so spreche Scham, ein Unwort wär dies Wort. So spreche Scham, ein Unwort wär dies Wort. Ein Unwort, Scham, ein Unwort, Scham, ein Unwort, Scham, ein Unwort, Scham.
Being asked where all thy beauty lies, where all the treasure of thy lusty days, to say within thine own deep sunken eyes, were an all-eating shame and thriftless praise.
Ein Wort sprichst du der Schönheit angemessen, indem du sprichst, mein ist dies schöne Kind, es setzt mich fort, ich bin unvergessen. Seht, wie die Schönheit mit ihm neu beginnt. Seht, wie die Schönheit mit ihm neu beginnt. Seht, wie die Schönheit neu beginnt.
How much more praise deserved thy beauty's use, if thou couldst answer, this fair child of mine will sum my count and make my old excuse, proving his beauty by succession thine. This were to be new made when thou art old, and see thy blood warm when thou feelst it cold.
So wärst du alt geworden, nimmer alt. Wer sagt, dein Blut verebbe? Nein, es wallt. Also in Sonett 2 beschäftigt sich Shakespeare mit dem Thema Jugend, Schönheit und Vergänglichkeit. Also es geht darum, dass man sich zwar über seine Schönheit und seine Jugend freuen kann, aber bitte nicht zu sehr, weil früher oder später wird sie sowieso weg sein, entschwinden. Und zwar schon nach 40 Wintern. Wenn man 40 Winter auf dem Buckel hat, dann war es das auch mit der Jugend. Und damals war die Lebenserwartung ja noch nicht so hoch wie heute. Damals war man mit 40 ja schon steinalt. Also es gibt so zwei Sachen, die ins Ohr fallen. Das eine ist, es gibt die ganze Zeit einen Puls, der durchläuft. So als Sinnbild für den Fluss der Zeit, den Puls der Zeit, die Zeit, die unaufhörlich weiterläuft. Und dann habe ich versucht, diese gewisse Ambivalenz des Themas Jugend einzufangen. Und zwar, indem die Stimmung in diesem Lied immer so ein bisschen changiert zwischen fröhlich und ernst. Und das habe ich gemacht, indem ich das Tongeschlecht relativ offen gelassen habe. Also das Tongeschlecht bedeutet, ob ein Akkord Dur oder Moll ist. Und Dur, D-Dur, klingt immer so ein bisschen fröhlich, strahlend. Moll klingt dann eher düster und traurig. Wenn man jetzt aber keine Terz benutzt, weder eine Dur-Terz noch eine Moll-Terz, dann kommt man zu so einem offenen Klang, der die Atmosphäre so relativ uneindeutig lässt. Und dann habe ich an einigen Stellen halt eben es immer changieren lassen zwischen Dur, Moll und diesem offenen Klang. Also offen, Moll, Dur. Ich kann das ja mal an einem Beispiel erklären.
Oh ja, gern.
Und zwar in der ersten Strophe, wenn 40 Winter deine Stirn umdrängen, der Schönheit Flur voll Furchen steht. Diese Zeile schauen wir uns jetzt mal näher an. Es beginnt mit diesem offenen Klang. Bei Schönheit Flur, bei Furchen geht der Basston in die Mollterz. Bei verheert seht ihr hier, geht die Melodie einen Halbton runter und bildet mit dem Basston einen Tritonus. Das ist ein dissonantes Intervall für das Wort verheert. Verheert, das Wort musste ich mir auch erst erklären lassen. Man kennt ja verheerend und das kommt halt wohl daher, dass früher, wenn die Heere über die Länder gezogen sind, haben sie nur Verwüstung zurückgelassen. Und Verwüstung klingt ja wohl eindeutig wie ein Tritonus. Also wir haben immer diese Ambivalenz. Ist die Jugend jetzt gerade etwas, worüber wir uns freuen? Deiner Jugendkleid. Oder etwas, was eigentlich, wo wir schon wissen, wir werden sie sowieso verlieren. Also auch irgendwie was Trauriges. Also es geht darum, du wirst gefragt nach ihr, nach der Schönheit, wo ist deine Schönheit hin? Und dann antwortest du beim eingesunkenen Auge. Aber hier ist es so formuliert, wenn man sich nach ihr fragt, nach der Schönheit, wirst du dies beim eingesunkenen Auge sagen. Und diese Anführungszeichen kann man ja, wenn man Klavier spielt, nicht mitmachen. Deswegen habe ich halt nach einer Möglichkeit gesucht, wie man diesen Einschub hörbar machen kann im Gesang. Und deswegen habe ich da diesen etwas exaltierten Oktavsprung in der Melodie. Das klingt dann so: Du dies beim eingesunkenen Auge sagen. Also das kann man in Noten auch ganz schön sehen, dass das im Prinzip, der Erzählstrang geht hier unten weiter und das eingesunkene Auge ist wie so ein Einschub, der auch ein bisschen witzig klingt, weil ich eben die Formulierung auch einfach ein bisschen witzig fand. Ja, also das Hauptproblem, auf das ich immer stoße, wenn ich diese Sonette vertone, ist, dass es keine Refrains gibt. Ja? Es gibt nicht so Wiederholungen und Parts, die immer wieder kommen. Und das erwartet man natürlich bei einem Lied. Deswegen suche ich immer nach Möglichkeiten oder nach Stellen, die man gut wiederholen kann, damit es ein bisschen was Eingängiges bekommt. Und bei diesem Sonett hier habe ich mich für diese Worte entschieden, diese Aufzählungsworte, die hier so ganz, also vor allem in der deutschen Übersetzung, so ganz besonders schön hart und abfällig klingen. Plunder, Kram, keinen Groschen, Scham, ein Unwort. Also der Paul Celan, der das übersetzt hat, verwendet hier lauter so schöne, harte deutsche Wörter. Und die habe ich im Kreis gesungen. Und durch diese Wiederholung bekommen die dann auch noch mehr so einen ironischen Unterton. Plunder, Kram und keinen Groschen. Plunder, Kram. Das gefällt mir in der Übersetzung ganz gut. Ich habe lange überlegt, ob ich die deutsche Übersetzung benutze für die Vertonung oder eben das englische Original, was natürlich, bei Shakespeare sind das ja immer auch Klangkunstwerke, die Sonette. Und eine Übersetzung kann das ja nie so, also zumindest den Klang nie so nachkopieren. Ich habe mich trotzdem für das Deutsche entschieden und gerade Paul Celan macht das ja sehr schön, er ja auch selber mit Worten umgehen kann. Und bei Gedichten ist es ja so, die leben ja nicht nur von den aufgeschriebenen Worten, sondern auch eben von dem dazwischen, von dem Ungesagten und von so einer,
vom Klang des Wortes selber.
Klang des Wortes, von der Ambivalenz, die eben auch so entstehen kann durch die Dinge, die nicht ausgesprochen werden. So. Und diese Zwischentöne, die finde ich einfach wahnsinnig schwer zu begreifen in einer Sprache, die nicht meine Muttersprache ist. Und genau diese Zwischentöne sind natürlich essentiell für eine Vertonung, weil die Musik kann ja diese Zwischentöne zum Klingen bringen. Deswegen habe ich mich für die deutsche Variante entschieden, wollte aber eben dann doch dem Original auch gerecht werden, was eben diesen klanglichen Aspekt angeht. Also dass man es einfach hörbar macht, wie Shakespeare seine Gedichte sprachlich, klanglich aufgebaut hat. Auch wenn vielleicht nicht jeder deutsche Zuhörer, jede deutsche Zuhörerin das direkt genauso gut verstehen kann wie das Deutsche. Aber trotzdem glaube ich, dass man über den Klang der Sprache einfach dem Kunstwerk noch mal näher rückt. Der letzte Satz, wer sagt, dein Blut verebbe? Nein, es wallt. Da kommen wir am Ende wieder zurück auf diesen Puls, den wir vom Anfang kennen. Und dann geht es halt um die Frage, verebbt dein Blut, wirst du vergessen? Nein, es wallt. Und auf dieses letzte Wort habe ich dann hier eben so einen Akzent gesetzt. Nein, es wallt. Und dieser Akzent, der lässt diesen Puls abreißen. Und wenn man so will, wird der Mensch aus seiner Gebundenheit an die Zeit, an den Puls der Zeit, durch diesen Akzent befreit. Und das war auch ein Reim. Und was sich reimt, ist gut.
To say within thine own deep sunken eyes. This phrase is difficult to understand at first. What is he on about? Well, let us take a step back. One of the most important tools in performing arts is close observation. And Will Shakespeare was a great observer. Look into the face of an old person. The skin around the eyes is paper thin, almost translucent, and often there is a bluish tint because the veins shine through. For lack of collagen, the skin recedes over the eyeballs, and the eyes seem to be set back like marbles into the bigger holes of the eye sockets. Deep, sunken eyes. This is an ingenious metaphorical use of our most important sense, for a majority of people, I have to add. The eye is the gateway between outer and inner world. In poetic language, the eye is dubbed the mirror of the soul, deep, sunken. An inverted or already dimmed vision, maybe? Perhaps there is also the notion of memory attached to this metaphor. It sounds odd today to be called old and used up at the age of 40. The youth's proud livery, the body, being a tattered weed with brittle bones and shrunken muscles and sagging skin. Well, in the 16th century, life was much shorter, death much more present. The concept of the thread of life being fine and easy to tear, much more familiar. 2 generations after Will Shakespeare, the poet-politician Andrew Marvell creates one of the finest metaphors for the transience of life. But at my back, I always hear time's winged chariot hurrying near. That is a line from Marvell's poem To His Coy Mistress. I'm pretty sure that Will Shakespeare heard time's winged chariot just as vividly as Marvell. Throughout his work, you detect his obsession with mortality. Time and again you hear a whisper behind his brilliant lines. Don't be daft. Grab your chances. Seize the day. Will must have told that to himself countless times. He's not only acutely aware of time and mortality, but also of the fleeting, giddy nature of fortune. Fickle fortune. Does he have a reason to doubt his good fortune? Yes. He is still a freelancer with not much money to spare. And he has a family to support up in Stratford. His wife Anne and 3 young children, his younger siblings, and his father John, who hardly leaves the house for fear of running into creditors. The once respected alderman got entangled in the illegal wool trade and became persona non grata within the Stratford community. So Will, as the eldest son, shoulders the responsibility of supporting the family. Soon, his brother Edmund will join him as an actor in London to help make ends meet. Will has been lucky to have found a powerful patron, only to discover that there is at least one other poet who competes for the Earl's favour. Sonnet 86 starts, "Was it the proud full sail of his great verse, bound for the prize of all too precious you?" There is a group of 9 sonnets, from Sonnet 78 to 86, that feature one or more poets who seem to threaten his position. Or maybe he is just jealous. Professional jealousy may surely have played a part. One ought to keep in mind, though, that there was no social insurance, no welfare state then. When your patron got bored and turned you out on the street, you were out in all weathers. So it's sink or swim. But in contrast to some of his critics who used rather blunt language in trying to put him down, Will shows his mettle by being elegantly poisonous about his competitor, or competitors. There are rumours that his chief competitor is George Chapman, fellow playwright, educated at Oxford, translator of Homer and fluent not only in Latin and Greek, but also in French. The Warwickshire bumpkin Shakespeare cannot measure up to an Oxford high flyer, so he resorts to Cordelia's strategy, love and be silent about it, with a small difference that Will Shakespeare writes about being silent. Oh, how I faint when I of you do write, knowing a better spirit doth use your name, and in the praise thereof spends all his might to make me tongue-tied, speaking of your fame. But since your worth, wide as the ocean is, the humble as the proudest sail doth bear, my saucy bark, far inferior to his, on your broad main doth wilfully appear. Your shallowest help will hold me up afloat, whilst he upon your soundless deep doth ride. Or being wrecked, I'm a worthless boat, he of tall building and of goodly pride. Then if he thrive, and I be cast away, the worst was this: my love was my decay. He starts off this sonnet by declaring his own weakness. Oh, how I faint when I of you do write. He is making himself small and the other poet seemingly very potent. He compliments his rival by comparing him to a tall, proud ship, he of tall building and of goodly pride, and himself to a little barnacle bobbing up and down on the waves, my saucy bark inferior far to his. He uses another, very clever figure of speech. He likens the adored subject of the sonnet to the wide ocean. There cannot be a more high-status metaphor than that. Not for someone belonging to a seafaring nation. And yet, the motion of the bobbing little barnacle and the proud ship riding the waves of the ocean, there is an inverted metaphor hidden within the apparent image. The ocean is grand and magnificent, but it is the ships that are active. Will continues to diminish himself by saying that even the tiniest gesture will help him to stay afloat. Your shallowest help will hold me up afloat. That is to say, I do not ask for much. I am humble. I know my place. The next line, referring to his rival's intentions, uncovers, or so he makes us believe, the other's presumptuousness to ride the soundless deep of the admired object. The ending couplet is an absolutely brilliant piece of rhetoric. The subtext goes like this. The other poet thrives through his scheming, while he, Will, is prepared to be cast away and decay for his genuine, deep, but silent love. Many a politician could learn how to string a chain of arguments from this consummate master. Back to dirty reality. And there is the plague. You must not catch the bad miasma. If anyone in the house you live in shows the telltale signs, egg-sized buboes in the armpits or groin, very high fever and chills, a searing headache, all inhabitants will be shut in together with only a slim chance of survival. To give you the odds, the chance of dying of plague is higher than 1 in 2. The doors are bolted from the outside, and that's that. 2 weeks later, the doors will be opened again, and people will flock around to see if there are any survivors. If there is anyone left alive, he or she will have become immune. The plague never really went out of London, so Londoners had come to terms with it. There were 11 boroughs then. As long as the toll of plague deaths did not surpass 30 per week per borough, everyday life went on, and theatres did business as usual. But when the death toll soared, as in 1593, government officials took desperate measures. For example, they called all cats and dogs in an attempt to slow down the spread of the disease. Big mistake. The dogs and cats had kept the rat population in check. With their natural predators gone, the flea-infested rats invade the houses, and the real culprit, the bacterium Yersinia pestis, has a field day. Hindsight is a wonderful thing. There is only one sonnet, number 146, where terror of death and eternal damnation is directly expressed. But what a sonnet it is. Poor soul, the centre of my sinful earth, fooled by these rebel powers that thee array, why dost thou pine within and suffer dearth, painting thy outward walls so costly gay? Why so large cost? Having so short a lease, dost thou upon thy fading mansions spent? Shall worms, inheritors of this excess, feed up thy charge? Is this thy body's end? Then, soul, live thou upon thy servant's loss, and let that pine to aggravate thy store. Buy terms divine, in selling hours of dross. Within be fed, without be rich no more. So shalt thou feed on death, that feeds on men. And death, once dead, there's no more dying then. In the first line, he addresses his own soul. Poor soul, the centre of my sinful earth. His soul is the centre, enveloped by his body that he calls sinful earth. But his soul is suffering and hungry while the body struts about in costly, gay apparel. This is a powerful metaphor from the medieval worldview. According to medieval Christian dogma, the 7 deadly sins infiltrate our physical being through the senses. They are lust, gluttony, greed, sloth, wrath, envy, and pride, with pride and greed the worst sins underlying all others. Pride was Lucifer's downfall. Pride hides in the costly apparel and, most of all, in the rebel powers he alludes to in the second line. Look at the verb. The rebel powers array. It is a term borrowed from warfare. The array of soldiers. But there is also another possible meaning, to decorate, to embellish. There is a particular difficulty with the first quatrain. In the original 1609 edition, the first word of the second line is missing. Instead, there is a repetition of the last 3 words of the first line, probably due to an eye-skip error of the typesetter. Fooled by has been proposed among other possibilities. I personally think it's a very plausible one. Look at the following 2 lines. Who does what? It's the soul that paints the outward wall. The soul does the cheating and self-inflicted harm. In the end, the soul will lose the wager and the body will perish. Better the other way round. The soul should be fed. The focus should be on the spiritual. No more indulgence in sensual satisfaction. Is he really comfortable with that? Look at the Volta. It is the beginning of the 3rd quatrain. Then, soul, live thou upon thy servant's loss. The command is to first oppress the body, hoard spiritual riches at the body's cost, and then to strike a bargain with heaven, by terms divine. One might argue that this is just the reverse of the situation above. But look at the actions described. It is the soul that paints the outward wall, the physical appearance. The soul tries hard to keep the mansion, that is to say the body, beautiful. The mansion, though, is fading. the body will perish. Rapacious worms eat up a carcass when life has passed from it. The second quatrain consists of questions. Why expend so much energy on something that you will lose in the end? Here, charge refers to the body, to cost, expenditure, and also to that which is given into care, the soul's well-being, that is. The third question is a pivotal moment. I don't hear it as equally rhetorical as the first two, but with a horrid image in mind, you will speak it with a sense of revulsion. This feeling will drive you into the third quatrain. So the soul, now terrorized by those images of what lies ahead, will turn upon the body, oppress the greed, pride, and vanity of physical presence. But here again, the price is high.
Look at the last couplet. The soul not only overcomes death, no, the soul is feeding on death, who in turn is devouring all living bodies. Thus, the soul becomes the ultimate predator, devouring death by devouring its own associated body. The very last sentence, "There's no more dying then," may sound positive at first, but consider what needs to be done in order to reach that goal. This is downright cannibalism.
Does he tell us that the Christian soul-body dualism inherited from Plato is absurd in its last consequence? If this is philosophical irony, it is pitch black. What images does he conjure? Worms feeding on carcasses, the soul feeding on death. Whether you see sharp teeth tearing flesh or crunching bones or some poisonous vapors engulfing and dissolving that being, it is gruesome, it's brutal. It reminds me of Macbeth's soliloquy in Act 5, Scene 5, on the news of Lady Macbeth's death.
Life's but a walking shadow, a poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage and then is heard no more. It's a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. He must have believed in some kind of afterlife, otherwise he would not have addressed his soul. Does he consider himself to be too sinful to be fit for redemption? Generally, he's not one to shy away from physical joy. Will loves life, and he loves to love. At only 18, he marries 26-year-old Anne Hathaway. She is already pregnant with their first daughter, and 2 years later, the twins, Hamlet and Judith, are born.
From 1592 to 1610, Will lives in London, visiting Stratford only a few times per year. From that simple fact, many biographers deduce a marriage gone cold, and of course, from the second best bed he bequeaths to his wife 2 weeks before his death. But are these really compelling reasons? I don't think so. The second best bed is the marriage bed, with the best bed being reserved for special guests only. Here's another gentle, almost melancholic sonnet, number 27, where sleepless Will stares at the ceiling, dreaming of his faraway love.
Weary with toil, I haste me to my bed. The dear repose for limbs with travel tired. But then begins a journey in my head to work my mind, when body's work's expired. For then my thoughts, from far where I abide, intend a zealous pilgrimage to thee, and keep my drooping eyelids open wide, looking on darkness, which the blind do see. Safe that my soul's imaginary light presents thy shadow to my sightless view, which like a jewel, hung in ghastly night, makes black night beauteous and her old face new. Lo, thus by day my limbs, by night my mind, for thee and for myself no quiet find.
Why shouldn't it have been directed at faraway Anne in Stratford? They have 3 kids together, and who can tell how big Will's heart really was? It may have been spacious enough to accommodate several beloved ones. Rumours of his amorous adventures abound.